Sorry guys, my screen recording ran out before. That's why I have to split this into two videos. So continuing with space. So here up in the right corner is showing just a few different ways on how to illustrate space. So one way is through overlapping. So this space, this little circle right here is on top. This one is behind that. This one is behind that. So this one that is on top would technically be closest to the viewer, and these hide behind that first one. So by overlapping creates the illusion of space. Shading helps also to illustrate space, and this circle now is a sphere through shading. Placement of objects. So these items are placed, these spheres are placed within the space. There is space between them. Okay. They are positive space, where everything around it is negative space. Another way to show the illusion of space is through size. Items that are closest to the viewer are going to appear larger. For example, in these two pictures down here, the people here in the foreground are larger, showing that they are closer to the viewer, whereas people farther away appear to be smaller. That gives the illusion of space, also depth of field. Okay. Values and focus. Say, for example, think of a very foggy day. Things that are closest to the viewer are going to be more in focus. They are going to be darker values, whereas as things move farther back into the distance, especially on a foggy day, they tend to be more out of focus, and they tend to be lighter in value. Here is something called linear perspective, where the items are a linear line. They are moving back into the distance, and we can see once again, going along with size, as they are larger, they are closest to the viewer. As they are moving away, they are getting farther back in the distance, they are getting smaller. Here's an example of positive and negative space. So the bird here is the positive space. It is filled in with a color pencil. The negative space, the artist here chose to fill with writings. You might wonder, well, wouldn't that be positive space too? No, not necessarily. Here, the positive space is the painting, or the watercolor of the blue, which is surrounding the bird. And once again, the artist chose to fill in the negative space with writings. But once again, illustrating positive space and the negative space. Here's another example of positive negative space. This is a project that we do in regular studio art, where we start with a black piece of paper or a colored piece of paper. We draw on it, and then what we do is we flip the design. So the black paper is the positive, the yellow is the negative. So this piece of the tree, the top of the tree and the bark here, was cut from this paper and flipped. So once again, the black paper is the positive space, whereas the yellow is the negative space. For example, because this tree and such was cut from this piece. So this is positive, this is negative. Color. Color is a very large part of the elements of art, and there's a lot that goes along with color, and this is just some of the very, very basics. Color is the use of hue within an artwork. To begin with, we start with the primary colors: yellow, red, and blue. These colors cannot be mixed. These colors can be mixed, to create other colors. However, you can't mix two colors to create them. We also call them the pure colors. Secondary colors are created by mixing two primaries together. Green is created by mixing yellow and blue. Purple is created by mixing blue and red. Orange is created by mixing yellow and red. And then we have something called tertiary colors. This is created by mixing a primary and a secondary together. Now, I like to call color or color theory basically like the math of art. Okay, so here we have our color wheel. We have our primary colors, or yellow or blue, or red. We have our secondary colors, red and yellow equal orange, yellow and blue equal green, yellow and red equal purple. All right, so those are primary or secondary, and then we have our tertiary. Mixing a secondary and a primary, like red and violet, we get red-violet. Blue and violet together make blue-violet. And the names are just simply named after the two colors that mix them. Tint is when you add white to a color to make it lighter. Shade is when black is added to a color to make it darker. Now, some people might say, well, you tint your windows, that makes them darker. Yeah, well, I like to say the person who gave the name to that really wasn't paying attention in art class. Tint is when you make a color lighter. Shade, think of when you pull the shades in a room, it gets darker. There you go. Neutral colors. Neutral colors are browns, tans, and even grays. Neutral colors are just that, they're neutral. They're neither primary, secondary, or tertiary. They are in a color scheme all of their own. All right, here are a few artworks that contain color, and I'm sure you can think of many artworks that contain color, including a few that you have seen in other slides in this presentation. All right, so what are the three primary colors? Now, something that's actually changed for those of you who are at home watching this, you are not using Pear Deck. You guys are using Edpuzzle in order to answer them. But you're going to be answering this question. Now, color is big because you can use color to work together. Like this picture right here uses something called monochromatic colors, where this is pretty much all different values of blue. We have colors that are analogous, which are next to each other on the color wheel. So we have yellows, we have blues, we have greens in this image right here. Like I said, there's a lot to color theory. This is just touching the tip of the iceberg. Value. Value deals with color and with shading. Value or tone refers to the use of light and dark shades and highlights in an artwork. Value is directly related to contrast. Value can be changed by adjusting pressure, by hatching or cross-hatching, by stippling, or by adding white or by adding black. These are just a few ways in order to create value. So below, as you can see, we have a few different ways. This is hatching. Hatching is using lines in the same direction. The lighter the lines and the further the lines are apart, the lighter the value is going to be. As you add more lines, then they get closer together, the darker the value becomes. Cross-hatch lines are similar to hatch lines, however, they add the cross to them. So here we start with the vertical lines. Then we get on to adding a separate direction. So we had vertical, now we've added horizontal. And we see this square is darker, visibly, than the first. The third square, we have added a diagonal, overlapping the horizontal and the vertical lines. So as we see, we add another direction, it creates another layer, creating a darker value. And here we go, our darker value. Adding the vertical, horizontal, and crisscrossed in two different directions. Stippling is adding dots. Once again, just like the hatched lines, with stippling, the farther apart dots are, the lighter the value. The more dots that you add and the closer together they are, it starts to fill the space and the value becomes darker. All right, we're going to take a look at the blue right here, the blue scale. When you add white to the color, it makes the color, the value of the color, lighter. So say if this is our starting color, this nice pretty blue. We add white, it gradually gets lighter. And the more white you add, the lighter it becomes. The opposite is true with black. We add a little bit of black, the color gets a little bit darker. The more black we add to a color, the darker it becomes. And so here's just a few different artworks showing various ways of utilizing value. So the top right picture, the top left picture uses cross-hatching. Lines in different, and hatching. Lines in the same direction and lines in different directions in order to create value. Now, this is a project we would do in a regular studio class. However, you guys are a digital media class. You are not drawing things like this. However, it will be created in other pieces of artwork. Here, we're using stippled lines. Okay, we're using circles. So here you can also see some of the circles are much smaller. As the circles increase in size and closeness, the value gets darker. Here's a picture of an apple, and we can see there's different values. We can see the shadow right here, this core shadow of the apple. These white areas, that would be our highlight. And we're seeing all these other values, these other grays in between. All right, here we have a watercolor. We see the different values of the blue, the really dark values, medium values, and then some very light values. In this image with the clouds, we see same thing, different values of the blues, different values of the greens. Adding white makes the value lighter. We see in the tree, the greens, adding black makes it darker. So name one way to create value. The last element for today is texture. Texture is the quality of a surface or the representation of the feeling of a surface. Lines and shading, or value change, can be used in order to create different textures as well. Texture words include coarse, bumpy, scaly, smooth, flaky, prickly, soft, silky. So these are all terms, and there's even more of them, in order to define texture, how something feels or how something appears to feel. All right, we can see this texture here. How would you describe it? It's going to be a flaky texture. How would you describe this? Yes, that is a sculpture created by pencils. It's definitely not something I'd want to pick up. All right, using line to create texture. So if you were to draw texture, here's a few different ways using different types of techniques. So this is a wood grain texture. And here's a few other examples of it. Okay, we have some stone or cobblestone texture, some rocks. Right, this kind of looks like a liquidy texture. Same with this, or a very, very smooth or glass-like texture. This texture is kind of hairy. All right, so these are visual textures in artwork and sculpture. I'm sure many of you who have been to Disney or Epcot have seen this before. All right, but these are ways to create texture.